Just days after the fall of the Assad regime, countries across Europe, including Germany, Sweden and the UK, announced plans to pause asylum applications for Syrians. But what does this mean for those seeking safety and stability abroad? The announcement left over 100,000 Syrians in Europe uncertain about their future. The European Union Agency for Asylum reported that Syrian applications made up 14% of all asylum claims in 2024, with more than 100,000 still pending.
What I think is sad is the suspension of claims that are in process, particularly family reunification, that I think is particularly sad. I think it's very cynical because we really don't know what's happening with Syria. In fact, I think the most extreme position is Austria, which has about 100,000 Syrians, and they've decided to start deporting Syrians, which is quite cynical if you consider that Syria is officially considered unsafe for return in terms of the EU understanding.
The situation in Syria remains far from stable. Bombings persist, and the new interim government faces the monumental task of rebuilding a country ravaged by over a decade of war. Despite the change in leadership, Syria is not yet deemed safe for return by international standards.
Many Syrians would hesitate about returning. There's also a notion that we cannot forget that there has to be some kind of mechanism of transitional justice. There has to be some kind of a transitional justice process. Otherwise, we're going to see a lot of revenge killing emerging. So it probably will take another year before he starts putting forward what I call an interim government that is truly reflects the ethno-religious complexity that is Syria. I don't think he can do it in the first 3 months, because in the first 3 months, he just has to guarantee that a government functions.
The freeze of asylum applications has sparked intense ethical debates. Critics argue that these policies contravene international conventions, including the 1951 Refugee Convention, which prohibits returning individuals to unsafe conditions. Advocacy groups, including Amnesty International, have called for an immediate reversal of these decisions, emphasizing the need for compassion and adherence to global standards.
Many of the Syrians who have managed to settle and integrate, those who have not only been granted asylum, but also have residence in the countries that they are in, cannot be legally deported.
Syria remains the world's largest displacement crisis. Since 2011, more than 14 million Syrians have been forced to flee their homes. Within Syria, over 7.2 million people are internally displaced, with 70% of the population reliant on humanitarian aid and 90% living below the poverty line. Outside Syria, approximately 5.5 million refugees are hosted in neighboring countries, including Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq and Egypt. Germany, as the largest non-neighboring host, shelters more than 850,000 Syrians. The return of internally displaced people to their homes and the eventual repatriation of refugees from host countries could put enormous pressure on Syria. This could destabilize the already fragile new government.
The problem that the regime faces now is they can't have them all come back. The homes have all been destroyed. They need to start rebuilding the country. So there have to be some breaks. Just be patient to give the country a chance to start rebuilding. Maybe it'll take a year, maybe a year and a half, because when they come back, they have to have houses, schools have to be rebuilt. The government was targeting schools and hospitals, and those have been badly damaged. And also, unless Europe lifts its sanctions and the proscription on the Association for the Liberation of Syria, they can't do it. How can you send people to a country that you're calling safe if it's still proscribed and if it's still under sanctions? So they may be talking about it, but when it comes down to the actual fact, first they have to liberalize, they have to open up, they have to start helping develop the country, they have to start allowing the purchase of the kinds of things they need to build this country, and then they can talk about, okay, we're going to send people back. But if the country is under proscription and sanctions, how can it be declared safe?
As Syria begins its fragile recovery, the international community faces a critical responsibility. Deportation must only occur when conditions in Syria meet the standards of safety, stability, and dignity outlined in international law. Return should be voluntary and based on informed decisions, ensuring that refugees are not forced into situations of renewed insecurity. Upholding these principles is not only a legal obligation, but a moral imperative to support those who have endured over a decade of conflict.